thank you to the County Office of Education and our Superintendent, Michael Watkins, for bringing Mr. Kinsey and his son to be with us today. I just want to remind you that this is a special event and we want to give our presenters and the presentation our undivided attention. So thank you very much. And this is Michael Watkins, our Superintendent.
County Superintendent, really quickly, those of you that are here today are in for a treat. It's typically a 3-hour presentation. We only have about 40 minutes, but if anything, when you leave here today, you will think and think differently. So you guys are the lucky ones that are here today, and I want to thank your principal, Casey, and Julie for having us here today. Now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Bernard Kinsey. His son Khalil's up in the booth, I think, but let's give him a big hand, please, for Aptos.
All right.
I'm also an Aptos resident. My kids graduated from Aptos High School, so it's a pleasure being back here. Mr. Kinsey.
All right. Khalil, we're going to show you a short video and we'll be right back up, okay? All right. Get it up.
It is called The Personal Treasures of Bernard and Shirley Kinsey. The collection features rare pieces which until now have been tucked away in a private gallery.
We are at the home of Bernard and Shirley Kinsey to take a look at the Kinsey Collection.
The Kinsey Collection pays homage to African Americans who helped build and transform the United States.
Once scattered by history and now gathered in a single collection, a cultural inheritance for African Americans.
Tonight, a conversation about the intersection between art and history with Bernard and Shirley Kinsey.
Documenting the African-American experience from the early 17th century through the tumultuous civil rights era, the Kinseys have had a 30-year love affair with collecting.
The Kinsey Collection started 30 plus years ago.
We didn't start out for this to be a collection, but we're delighted that it has happened that way, because the more we began to understand and know about our history, the more we felt that other people needed to be touched and know about it too.
Some of the items were passed down through their family. Some were purchased at auctions, and others were acquired during the Kinseys' numerous trips around the world.
We've been to 90 countries and 6 continents, and we basically collected something from all of these 90 countries. But our real focus has always been, how do we speak to the African Americans' experience?
Their collection isn't only African American, but mostly paintings, sculpture, and documents from the distant past and the not-so-distant.
I love this letter. A letter from Malcolm X to Alex Haley, 1963.
Over the years, they realized they were collecting a story.
When we came to the Americas from Africa, how did we evolve? And that evolution is both painful and wonderful. And putting that together is what we tried to do here.
It's been quite a journey for a couple who met as college kids at predominantly black Florida A&M in 1963, when students were fighting for civil rights.
I met her after she got out of jail.
They've grown so close.
Demonstrated. So, sit-ins and that.
They finish each other's sentences. So you knew she was something special from the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Both now are retired from Xerox, where Bernard rose to become vice president. He's now a much-in-demand business consultant.
Fast forward to the present, the couple holding a news conference in Washington, D.C. as their collection, the shared treasures of Bernard and Shirley Kinsey, now greets visitors to the busiest museum in all the world, the Smithsonian.
I have opened numerous exhibitions throughout my career, but few have excited, few have challenged, few have moved me as much as the Kinsey Collection.
As the first African American ever to publish a book of poetry.
This is my first time seeing the collection since I did the recording for it. So it's kind of fantastic. It's a wonderful way to show that we too are part of the fabric of the making of this nation, which sometimes I think gets forgotten in the telling of the American stories.
Efforts like this are efforts to fill that gap. This is really important for young people. Knowing who you are is the best grounding you can get.
I am
immeasurably proud of my parents. Every day I learn something from them continually. I get to work with them, and I never, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I'd be working with my parents, there wouldn't have been a chance. But it's been remarkable to see their partnership.
The Kinseys have reached a stage in their lives where they can afford to indulge their passions, one even greater than collecting, sharing. Together, they have raised more than $22 million for scholarships at historically black colleges.
You know that black people have been a part of everything that's happened in the Americas almost from the beginning. And having that connection with the past and with history is what really creates this sense of strength inside of us, and to know that we have this identity and this lineage that is so powerful. We think what we have is the beginning of this story about this wonderful, wonderful race called African Americans that came out of a terrible situation.
I want our people to be empowered by all the accomplishments, all the things that we did in building this country. And as Bernard said, sometimes let everybody know we got dibs here. Okay? And we didn't always come here as slaves. We came here as free people initially.
All right. All right, it's okay. All right, y'all come on in. Casey and Julie, you all come in. What we want to do, the Kinsey family would like, could you come right here? Okay, okay. First of all, we are just delighted to be here. Our book, the Kinsey Collection, we'd like to donate this to your library so that each of you will have an opportunity to experience this wonderful story of accomplishment and achievement of African Americans beginning in 1595. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Julie. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we have, first of all, this is just delightful. Wow. Thank you, Casey. Huh?
I'm already crying.
All right.
I haven't seen that yet.
All right. Well, what we want you all to do is, how many of you all know about the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History? How many of y'all know where that is? Okay. So here's what I want you to do starting this afternoon. I want you to ask your mom and dad, and some of you are old enough to go on your own, and it's free, to go and see the Kinsey Collection, okay? And I tell you this, that you're going to see books, manuscripts, documents, and 2- and 3-dimensional art that you'll never, ever see again anywhere in this country, okay? So I want you to make a promise to yourself that you're going to share this beautiful collection with not only where you're going to be going in your life, but bring a friend with you so that they can share it with you, okay? Will y'all do that for me? Okay? Can I hear from you? All right, okay. So I'm going to give you a couple ideas here. We're going to do a little talk, and then we're going to talk about what we talk about all the time as black folks. Do you follow me? What we're here to do is to say that the story of the African American experience is not understood much because we haven't shared it in a way that people can access it. So what we've been doing as a family, our son Khalil and my wife Shirley, for the last 10 years, we have been to 20 cities, Santa Cruz being our 20th city. We've been to the Smithsonian, as you've seen it, and we are also at Epcot in Walt Disney World, where 15 to 20 million people will see it. So if you go to Epcot, then you should go to the American Pavilion and you'll see the Kinsey Collection. In the show in Santa Cruz at Ma, this is our first show that we've done in Spanish. So for Spanish-speaking people, we're doing a show in Spanish and English. And the reason we like that so much is because the story, the African American and Latino story is a shared history. And one of the things that most people don't know is how much history we share together. You follow me? So that's one of the things that we want to do, is to try to break some of those barriers down so that we work together better. And guess what? If I know more about you and you know more about me, we probably got a better chance of being friends, right? But if you don't, the only thing you know about me that I'm not worthy, then there's no reason for you to have a relationship with me, right? So this is about trying to make the stories of accomplishment and achievement really real. And when you see the remarkable stories of the untold stories that we have, it just warms your heart, and that's what this is about. So I'm going to give you a couple nuggets as what they come in. Here's one of the things I want to say. Be careful what you think because you don't know where it came from. Let's everybody say that. Be careful what you think because you don't know where it came from. Say it again. Be careful what you think. And I'm going to tell you why this is so important. Because a lot of us pick up thoughts and ideas from people and from even books that we don't know where it came from. We don't know how relevant it is. It's like if I told you to go and pick up a sandwich off the floor, you wouldn't do it, right? And what I want you to do for your own self is be careful what you let into your brain, okay? Because to the extent that you allow ideologies and different points of views that get in the way of you understanding who you are, you don't have the kind of life you want. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Bernard and Shirley Kinsey. When we came to California 49 years ago, we just celebrated our 49th anniversary, and I called my dad and asked my dad, I had a job. I said, Dad, can I borrow $300 to buy a car? And back in those days, $300 to buy a car. My dad said, Bernard, I'm not buying you no car. In the store. So I'm living in LA. My job is in Orange County, 40 miles away. It's taking 3.5 hours on a bus. I need a car, right? Okay. So I borrowed $250 and buy a 1961 Dodge Lancer. I don't know, y'all will know necessarily what that is. It was a lime green, no air conditioning, no heat. Everything was no, needed a paint job. But this car was the difference between me getting to work and not getting to work. Let me tell you what we did. All of our friends were driving around in new cars. And we were driving around in this 1961 push-button Dodge. What we did was we drove that car for 5 years. Matter of fact, Shirley had to put a blanket over her knees because it didn't have heat. I'm serious. We sold that car for $275 5 years later. So let me tell you what I figured out. You buy a car for $250, use it for 5 years, and sell it for $275. Pretty good deal, right? Okay, let me do the math. So what Shirley and I decided to do is for us to get ahead in life, we were going to partner. And one of the things I want you to do, you're all too young to be talking about relationships, too strong relationships. But one of the things that each of us at some point, you need to really have someone that you're going to really invest in. You follow me? That you're going to work closely with. And that's what we did. And we did that in a way that really has provided the life that we enjoy today. On next week, we're going to be going to our 99th and 100th country. Okay? 99 and 100. So we have literally seen and been any place and every place you could want to be. And I would encourage each of you, starting now, and many of you have already started, get out and see the world. Because to be a traveler, you cannot have a narrow mind. That's what I like about it. In other words, anytime you find somebody that loves traveling, you have to open up your mind because it's different food, the different environments, places to stay, right? So you have to learn how to adapt. But that's 95% of living in this world is learning how to adapt. So I'm going to give you a couple others. Okay. People don't care how much you know until they know that you care. Let's everybody say that. People don't know how much you know until they know that you care. In other words, people aren't interested about how much you have until you prove to them that you want to be a what? Friend, right? So you want to look for that when you have relationships with your friends. There's a saying, nothing happens until something is sold. And I like this because I'm a salesman. Because every day we are trying to sell our ideas on what we're trying to do with our lives. And then how many times can I fail before I decide to quit? Now, this is a big one. It simply means you're in control of your life, okay? So let's say this. How many times can I fail before I decide to quit, okay? In other words, each of you have the ability to control your life as long as you don't give up on it, right? Now, I know all of you are going to finish high school, and many of you are going to go on to community college, right? And many of you are going to go on to to four-year college. And that really is the key to your success. So let's do this. Let's look at a little bit of the Kinsey Collection. You can see what we do. The book I just gave, Casey, your principal, and Julie, your librarian, this is what the Kinsey Collection strives to do. It strives to give our ancestors a voice, a name, and a personality, enabling the viewer to understand the challenges, obstacles, triumphs, accomplishments, and extraordinary sacrifice of African Americans in building this country. In America, your skin speaks before you do. Let me tell you what that means. In America, your skin, what do you think that means? In America, yes, what's your name? Jago. What do you think that means? You make a judgment based on that. You heard that? Because that's really how America works, right? Right? I mean, it goes from white to black, right? And there's gradation. So what we're saying is with the Kinsey Collection, what we want you to do is to start understanding how this country works. Because you're in the middle of it, you need to understand it. Every day on TV, you hear all this political stuff, right? It's all about race at the core of that whole process. So let's look at it. There's a concept called the myth of absence. The myth of absence says that as African Americans and Latinos, we're invisibly present. What that means is, what does invisibly present mean? What's your name? Alondra, what do you think invisibly present means? Okay, who wants to take that, invisibly present? Okay, right here. What does invisibly present mean? How can you be invisible and still present? Look at it that way. What do you think that means? Let me give you an idea. Suppose you're going to the prom, okay? That's coming up, right? And they're getting ready to do this big prom picture, and right before you're getting ready to take it, someone says, let me talk to you for a minute. And you go talk to them, and they take the picture, and you're not in the picture. You wouldn't feel good about that, right? Or you take the picture, and they Photoshop you out. Invisibly present really means that much of the history of this country was written without the accurate knowledge of the African American story. And what the Kinsey Collection is doing is giving you primary source documents to be able to put that accuracy back into the story. So let me go through it. So this is how the slave trade started back in 1501. You see these lines coming out of Africa to Brazil, to down into Argentina, all the way up into the Caribbean, into Veracruz, and that little line going to America is where all of the African Americans that are in this country, less than 450,000 African Americans came from what you see on that little line, of 15 million people that were kidnapped into slavery back in the 1500s. Is this an interesting diagram? Okay? And what I really want to show you that, if you look at, this is Argentina. The tango came out of Africa. Did y'all know that? That's good. In the 1850s, half of Buenos Aires was black. In Mexico in the 17th century, there were more black people in Mexico than there were Mexicans. In Peru in the 16th century, there were more black people in Lima than there were black. Can you believe that? Let me tell you how this happens. It's called immigration. When Europeans immigrated into all of these countries, it lightened the population. So a lot of people look more like me or maybe even like you, right? Because over a period of time, the population lightened, okay? So let's keep going. So this is a good example. This is 1604. This shows Lima, Peru during the Inquisition. How many of you all studied the Inquisition? How many of you? Okay. Did you read anything about black people in Lima during the Inquisition? Not a word, right? Myth of absence, right? Okay. But you can see that this document, 1604, and what I love about this is when Pizarro, during the Inquisition, in the plaza in Lima, Peru, and they were talking about Negroes, mulattoes, and mestizos. That's us. You follow me? Okay? Another myth of absence, okay? All right. The Mexican slave trade. Here is Jose Montano being sold for 60 pesos in Mexico, 1790, okay? This is what Mexico looked like before 1850. In other words, Mexico owned all the way to Oregon in what we now know as America. And because of slavery and cotton, there was a war that was started with Mexico, and basically the Mexican government lost all of the land all the way to California, all the way to Oregon, over 500,000 miles of land, okay? Now, I said something about there were a lot of black people in Mexico. Matter of fact, there's still a lot of black people in Mexico. They all speak Spanish, okay? This is the General Vicente Guerrero, who was the second president of Mexico. What does he look like? Looks black, right? Because he's of African descent. What I love about this brother is that he led the Mexican army in the War of Independence, and he abolished slavery in Mexico in 1827. Did you know that? Okay, all right, let's keep going. Now, how many of you been to LA and been on Pico Boulevard? Okay? Every time you go on Pico Boulevard, they're talking about Pio Pico, okay? He was the first governor of California when it was owned by Mexico, okay? Now, this is really a good one here. Now, when you think of the founding of Los Angeles, you don't think that black people were involved in that, right? We were. Of the 44 people that founded Los Angeles, can anybody read that column on the right? How many was that? 26, and what is up at the top? Negro. They all spoke Spanish. What I'm trying to get you to see is that this history is sitting right in front of us, and what we're trying to do is to open that up so that you can step in and understand it better, okay? Now, we cut this presentation so we can go through early genius. Let me tell you what early genius. We had remarkable black people, African Americans, that did so much and nobody knew about it. So what we're saying is, let's expose you to some of those people. Here's a young sister that wrote a book, the first book written by an African American in America, September 1st, 1773. Her name is Phyllis Wheatley. She got her name from the slave ship Phyllis. The Wheatley family owned her, so now her name is Phyllis Wheatley. She speaks no English. Within 2 years of after coming to America, she speaks Latin and Greek. She's playing the piano and violin in 2 more years. And in 7 years, she writes the first book written by an African American in September 1st, 1773. I would think she's a genius, right? Would you think that? 16 years old doing that kind of thing. All right. The first African American to graduate from college was 1823. This Lucius Twilight also held the first, was the first political office holder in 1836 out of Vermont. This is all at Ma, okay, so you can see this yourself and read the didactics. This is the first scientific book written by an African American in 1796. Now, this guy, Benjamin Banneker, he also laid out Washington, D.C. So anytime you go to Washington, D.C., there was an African American that actually did the layout of Washington, D.C., okay? How many of you knew that African Americans painted in the 19th century? This is 1865, Robert Duncanson. He was considered the greatest painter in the West when the West only went to Cincinnati. His paintings right now are in England with the Queen of England at Buckingham Palace. He's also with the Queen of Norway. He was that popular in the 19th century. Grafton Tyler Brown, right there in San Francisco. He was just really a landscape artist and did so much to bring the West into people's homes. So let me give you Charles Ethan Porter, 1890. Edward Mitchell Bannister, 1893. Now, believe it or not, this young man, he won the highest award for art in 1876, and they didn't want to give it to him because he was black. And the only reason he got it is because his fellow contestants raised a little hell and made the people give him the award. But here's a guy receiving the highest award for art in 1876, okay? Reconstruction. What do we know about Reconstruction? Right here. That's good. Who else had their hand up on Reconstruction? Right here. Well said. It wasn't entirely effective, but it was the beginning of some freedom for black people after slavery. You know, during slavery, there were 4 million black people working on 75,000 plantations. Now, anytime you hear the word plantation, I want you to strike it out and call it a prison, because nobody could be on, quote, a plantation and never have to leave, you know, because black people that worked on these plantations really could not go anywhere. So they didn't have freedom, so we call them prisons. Now, anytime you see the word slave, I want you to say enslaved. So I want everybody to say enslaved. I want to say it with say enslaved. Say it again. Why do you think we should call someone, call that word enslavement rather than slavery? Anyone? Right here. That's right. Anybody else want to take it? That's good. Anybody else? Want to go again? Yes, enslavement. Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, let's look at it this way. Nobody woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm just going to give up my freedom, and I'm just going to let somebody own me and never have any ability to make choices in my life. And oh, by the way, my kids are going to have the same problem, right? So when you look at it that way, you know that this could not possibly be something that people wanted. They were forced into it. And when you begin to use the word enslave rather than slave, what you're going to do is to see a different person on that page than you saw before. I guarantee you, when you read every time, just see slave, just strike it out and say enslaved, and you'll bring those people into your heart. And when you bring them into your heart, you'll see them as human beings. That's what they were. Their lives mattered. Okay? All right. Here's Reconstruction, right? We started voting. In 1867, we were voting. Within a few years, there were over 2,000 African-American office holders in the United States in the 1860s and 1870s. This was the first 41st and 42nd congressmen. So these are congressmen and senators back in the 1870s. Can you believe we had a black senator from Mississippi? Can you see, am I in your way? Because if I am, I want to make sure I'm not. Can you believe this? When I learned this, it just blew me away. In 1870, there was a black senator from Mississippi, Hiram Rhodes Revels, congressman from Florida. He was also the mayor of Gainesville, Florida, back in the 1868, right after the war. Here's the second senator from Mississippi. Okay, you know what? This brother he was the treasurer of the United States in 1878, and every piece of every currency, all the money had his name on it. Did you know that? Would you call that myth of absence? Okay, all right. So let's just look at some of these congressmen. Look at this. From Georgia, Mississippi. Richard Harvey Kane, and this is the Enterprise Railroad Company. I had heard for a long time that there was a black railroad company. I didn't believe it until I found this document, the Enterprise Railroad Company, which substantiated that this company actually existed. It actually existed from 1875 to 1899. This company was in business, and it was founded by Congressman Richard Kane. The Pullman Porters, do you all know what Pullman Porters are? What are they? That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's right. At one point, Pullman Porters were the most employed group of black males in this country. And I credit them with the black middle class because they learned, they waited on white people every day on the train. They learned all of the ways of etiquette and so forth and so on, and they brought those home. And they were able to send their kids to college, so forth and so on. So it's a great story. Do you know we were cowboys in the West? We had over 18,000 black cowboys. You know what they would have called them if they were white? What do you think they'd call them? White, huh? Cowmen or something, right? Okay, right, okay, all right. How many of you heard of the Buffalo Soldiers? All right, you got some. The Buffalo Soldiers were called Indian fighters, and they opened up the West from Arizona, Utah, all the way to California. How many of you been to Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings Canyon? Let me see. Every trail in those 3 national parks were done by the Buffalo Soldiers, the 9th Cavalry, okay? Black people, okay? And the first superintendent of Sequoia National Park was a brother named Charles Young, who was one of the first superintendents of any national park, but was the first black superintendent in 1903, okay? Isn't he a good-looking young man? Henry Flipper, the first graduate of West Point. Now, I want to say this to you. I don't know if I even need to say it, but I'll say it. Because all of you are going to graduate from high school, right? Right? Let me hear you. All right. But can you imagine going to a college or a high school and nobody spoke to you for 4 years? Okay? That's what happened to Henry Flipper. And you know what I think is so brilliant about his story? He graduated. That's the thing that you all have to do. You can't let people get in the way. There's a saying, obstacles are those things that get in the way when you take your eye off the ball. Let's say that. Obstacles are those things that get in the way when you take your eye off the ball. Because that's really the only reason you're not going to reach your goals, right? That you start looking and getting distracted. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, that's when separate but equal, which is really meant separate but unequal. Here's the fastest bicycle rider in the 1890s, black man. Marshall Major Taylor. He was so fast that he won the American championship. They banned him from the sport because he was so fast. He went to Europe and became the European champion. And check this out. This is 1890. You ever heard of him? The first Kentucky Derby winner in 1875, Oliver Lewis. This is the last Kentucky Derby winner, Jimmy Winkfield, in 1901 and 1902. And the reason I'm showing this to you, because this is a part of this history that you should know, because if you knew this, you would know that African Americans contributed mightily to this country. Anytime you have a dime in your pocket, a sister, Selma Burke, created that image for Franklin Roosevelt. So the next time you pick up that dime, you're going to say, a sister made this, right? The image came from Selma Burke. And what I love about Selma Burke, at 70 years old, she got a PhD. So even at 70 years old, she hadn't stopped learning and growing. And that's what I want you all to do. I want you to travel. I want you to learn and never give up on reading, because that's really your way out. Because through reading, you'll see the world and see it in a whole different way. Okay, early entrepreneurs. This is James Fortin. He died in 1843 with a $100,000 estate, which is probably worth $1 billion now. Okay? The only guy that had a larger funeral than this black man in 1843 was Benjamin Franklin. He was just revered. Paul Cuffey, he was a captain of a merchant shipping company, had an all-black crew in the 18th century. Louis Temple. Have you ever heard of the Temple Toggle? Well, back in the 18th century, before oil was discovered, we got all of our oil from whales. The average whale had 3,000 gallons. So men had to go out and do what? Harpoon the whale. Well, the Temple Toggle is the part of the spirit that goes in the whale. And what people were always didn't like was because they kept losing their spears. So this brother Temple, Louis Temple, he created the Temple Toggle that you could retrieve the piece. He produced over 56,000 spears that changed the whaling industry, and was just extraordinary invention. This sister went to Russia in the 1840s and became an entrepreneur and started doing infant clothing in the 1840s. Christina Carteau was married to Edward Bannister. That's the guy that won the highest award in 1876. But she was successful as a salon maker herself in Boston during that same period. John Stewart Rock. Here's a guy that lived only 40 years, and I love this about him. He lived 40 years, but he was a dentist, a doctor, and a lawyer. And the year he died at 40 years old, he practiced before the Supreme Court. In other words, it's not how long you live, it's what you do while you're here, right? First female, African-American female doctor, Elijah. How many of you heard of the real Mccoy? The real Mccoy? I know somebody heard about the real Mccoy because we're always talking about the real Mccoy. The real McCoy is Elijah McCoy. When the railroads were the Transcontinental Railroad, the average rail car couldn't go but 8 to 10 miles before it had to be lubricated. So think about going from Philadelphia to San Francisco, and every 8, 10 miles you got to stop and lubricate this thing. Well, this brother figured out that they needed a different way to lubricate these valves. So he came up with the self-lubricating valve. It's really the McCoy self-lubricating valve. And this revolutionized the whole train industry and made train travel easy because you didn't have to stop it was almost like stopping for gas every 8 to 10 miles. Here's a guy that taught at Harvard University in 1870 and taught dentistry. Can you believe this? It was really remarkable when I saw this story myself. And what's remarkable about this young man, he takes up golf and he invents the wooden golf tee. So if you're on the course and you're hitting a golf ball, you're hitting a tee that was invented by someone of African descent. Louis Latimer, every light in this country that has a filament comes from Henry Latimer, who worked closely with Thomas Edison but never got the credit for his invention. His invention was making the filament last long enough for the light to stay on, which is a big deal when you think about it. First female lawyer, 1872. Now, I love this brother. He starts as a janitor in a shoe manufacturing company. Within 6 years, he decides that he can improve the process of making shoes. Back in this period in Boston, the average person could only make 50 shoes a day. He created the shoe lasting machine, and it was over 500 shoes were made now a day because of his invention. He makes $15,000 on this invention in the late 18th century. And here's a guy that starts as a janitor and sees himself working through that and creates the shoe lasting machine. Biddy Mason basically owned downtown Los Angeles as we know it. Madam C.J. Walker was the first self-made millionaire, not white, but the first self-made millionaire back at the turn of the century. This is a guy that went to MIT, was an architect went to MIT and graduated in 1896. Garrett Morgan, how many of you all drive? Quite a few of you. The next time you go to a traffic light, I want you to do a little bow, because the guy you're stopping for is Garrett Morgan, a black man. He invented the traffic light and the gas mask as we know it, okay? Yes, we had automobile companies. The Patterson Greenfield Automobile Company was in business from 1915 to 1939. This company also made buses and vans back at the beginning. How many of you heard of the Harlem Renaissance? That's good. Who wants to take the Harlem Renaissance? What was it? And it was more than art, though, wasn't it? It was art and music and dance, and it was a revitalization of the African-American experience in America. And it started really in New York and Washington, D.C. Okay? This is a great story here. This is Henry Moseley. And about 3 weeks ago, this guy's grandson heard that we were speaking and that we had a picture of his great-granddad and came to our talk. It was just amazing to meet the great-grandson of Henry Moseley. Henry Moseley fought for the French, even though he was an American soldier, because in the World War I, they didn't want black men carrying guns, even when we were fighting the Germans. So black soldiers weren't allowed to do anything but dig ditches and bury the dead and things like that. The French had already lost Paris. They decided that they needed help, and they put the 369th Harlem Hellfighters. They gave them French uniform and French guns, and these brothers fought all the way to the Rhine River and were the first regiment to reach the Rhine River back at the turn of the war and help win World War I. Okay? These are just some of the images of some of the people that fought in World War I. This is the first person to go to the North Pole, Matthew Henson. Have you all heard of Matthew Henson? Man, I mean, these people are doing all this good stuff. You got to just go on and you got to ask yourself, come on, let's get the history professors into this part of the story. Marcus Garvey. How many heard of Marcus Garvey? It's good. What do you know about Marcus Garvey? Okay. Who else had their hand up? Marcus Garvey. Yes, sir. Well, I think you're thinking about Du Bois, and you're thinking about Du Bois, but he's coming out of New York City. But let me just say this way: he was a back to Africa guy. He wanted black people to go back to Africa. Okay, and did you know that? You just have forgotten it? Okay, all right. But he had 8 million followers in the 1920s. It's really pretty amazing, okay? Everybody knows about Black History Month. This is the guy that started the Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson, okay? We have Latino History Month, female, It's good. Why do we need to celebrate these different cultures? He got his PhD from Harvard in 1898. That's the other thing I want you to know, okay? Here's the first Rhodes Scholar, 1907, Elaine Locke. Okay? Khalil's giving me the sign. Okay? Harmon Foundation. I'm going to try to get. So now here's what I want you to do. I'm going to go through the art part real quick. But go down the mall, okay? Is that a beautiful piece? You got to see this, 1899. And just look at the detail of this young boy. It's called Slave Boy. Okay? Hale Woodruff. The dancer. This is at Ma also. Okay? That's at Ma. All of this is at Ma. This guy spoke 17 languages. I didn't misspeak. 17 languages. He was valedictorian and All-American in 12 sports at Rutgers in the 1920s, 1930s, Paul Robeson, and was an opera singer. Okay? Look at this. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Richard Mayhew is from Santa Cruz and is alive. He's 93 years old. Wonderful artist, and this painting is there at Ma. Okay? This is Shirley and I on our 35th anniversary, and this young lady is the lady that painted that piece. Phoebe Beasley, civil rights. I'm going to just go right through. Jackie Robinson, there wouldn't be a civil rights movement without Jackie Robinson in 1947. You all heard of Tuskegee Airmen, right? They never lost a bomber on over 300 missions, the only group that never lost a bomber during World War II. How many heard of the Japanese internment? Okay. That was based on color. If you were Japanese in 1942, 1943, you were just put in a prison, basically. And they took you home, and that was it. Because they were scared that the Japanese were infiltrating the West Coast, particularly out of California. This is my dad, who taught, was a principal for 39 years, and basically helped integrate the South in Florida by suing the Palm Beach County School Board so black kids could go to school for 9 months versus 6 months. Can you believe in the South, the average black kid only went to school for 6 months, but white kids went to school for 9 months? How in the heck are we going to compete with somebody going to school 50% more than you? Okay? Thurgood Marshall was the attorney, also the Supreme Court Justice. This is Brown versus Board, 1954. This is Martin Luther King. I mean, you just got to go see this stuff, okay? This is Malcolm X. Y'all know about Malcolm, right? He's a bad boy, okay? The Black Panthers, right here up here in Oakland. Woolworth. This is why Shirley got, arrested. Mrs. Parks, who's a good friend of the family. This is the March on Washington. And this is a sign that was carried the day after Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis in 1968. So what I want to do, first of all, is thank each and every one of you, and I want to thank Casey and Julie, and I want to thank Michael Watkins and Marianne for having the Kinsey family out. And I want you to ask yourself, what do you do when you get new information? Okay, I want everybody to say that. What do you do when you get new information? What do you think you do? You change, right? And that's what I want you to consider by looking at the stories and going to the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History and reinforce what you have here. But thank you so much, and have a good life. Have a good life, okay? All right, okay. All right. And y'all got to go to class, right? What time is class, right now? Okay, all right, all right.
Hey, we're in the middle of a revolution because I see the face of things to come. Yes, I do. Oh, your Constitution. Well, my friend, it's gonna have to bend.